Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about another early Image title. However, this one not quite as well known as most of the other titles we've talked about so far on this channel. It's Shaman'e Tears #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. Before we get started with today's video, I would like to apologize if my voice sounds a little bit weird or if I end up clearing my throat at all during this video. I unfortunately had COVID rather recently, and while I am okay, I didn't get very sick, and I've been recovering just fine. I do still have a lot of congestion and a lingering cough that is incredibly annoying, so I'm still trying to get over that, but I need to get some videos recorded. First published in May of 1993, we see that Shaman'e Tears #1 has a very simplistic but also a very clean cover, all black with the red chromium or foil, if you will. I like the look of this cover. It's nothing flashy in the sense that it's not overdone. It's a very simple way to do the foil cover, somewhat reminiscent of the way that we saw with Deathblow #1, where it was just the logo that was done with the foil. I find this to be a good way to grab people's attention on the shelf. It's just flashy enough that you're going to see the reflection of the light when you walk by it, but it's also somewhat mysterious, kind of making you want to pick up this issue and flip through it, see what it's about. It's a really good attention grabber, and I understand a lot of people aren't really huge fans of the foil covers, and foil covers were becoming very blasé in the early 90s, and a lot of people were starting to get really upset about the added costs that they were starting to incur because of the foil covers. But I find it to be acceptable for seminal issues, #1s, #50s, #100s, that kind of thing. It's not really a problem until you start doing it for like every cover, and then it starts to get to be more of a pain than anything, and just a way of kind of like milking customers for more money. Writer, illustrator, Mike Grell. Art assistant, Brian Snooty. I'm probably saying that wrong, I apologize. Color artist, Joe Chiodo. Color separator, Digital Chameleon. Lettering, Steve Hainai, again, probably mispronouncing that somewhere. I am apologizing for that. And editor, Mike Gold. We see here on the first page, the picture is just a splash image of our title character in the middle of a city, but in his quote-unquote superhero costume, but is also supposed to have deep cultural significance to his tribe, as we will find out as we get into the series. I really like the image, and I do really like the way that the tassels from his armbands go out into the border and become one with the border. I think that's a really cool looking visual effect that was done here. And overall, I really like this first page. I think it's a good example of what to expect as we go forward in this book. We then see a very long letter written by Mike Gold, and I mean very long. This is only the first page of this letter. This letter is 3 pages long. The short version is, he has worked with Mike Grell on many different projects over the course of their careers, and this is basically just kind of a rundown about that. We then see in the beginning of the story that it starts out in the past, where we see a news reporter speaking about the fall of the former Soviet Union and the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, but also bringing up the conundrum that is now faced by the different world governments about who will be able to lay claim to a Soviet space station that is orbiting around the planet. They're not certain who exactly is going to go and retrieve all of the data on this space station. Also, there is a lone cosmonaut who is still living on the station and has been there by himself for 8 months at this point, as we are then shown said cosmonaut, who is outside of the space station, which I'm not sure how you would potentially do a spacewalk like this without anybody on the inside of the space station to allow you to get back in or monitor your life support system while you're out there. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do it. I'm not an astronaut, but it seems unlikely that you'd be able to pull this off operating completely on your own. He's, just getting down to some repairs, apparently with a wrench, singing a little song to himself, when suddenly he turns around and has the backside of a pickaxe shoved into the visor of his helmet, cracking it as he screams in terror of what is about to happen. The cosmonaut is killed nearly instantly by the vacuum of space as we see him flying backwards with blood just pouring out of the helmet of his suit. We then see an American astronaut who is a general in the U.S. military, known as General Pending, cut his tether, which we see blood pouring out of the end of that, and his eyeball floating through space with the bladed side of his axe. And we also see a space shuttle that is preparing to dock with the Soviet space station. However, I do find it rather unlikely that the Americans would have known exactly what type of apparatus they would have needed to dock with a Soviet space station, but I could be wrong. General Pending says that they've created a blackout so that the Russians who are monitoring this space station are going to be essentially blind for the next 7 minutes, and that they have to execute their plan quickly as they hook up the end of this tube to the space shuttle, which, by the way, they now have to get back to the space shuttle and then go back through this tube to get into the space station. And it seems like 7 minutes isn't really going to be enough time for them to do all that, get into the space station, and retrieve all of the information that they're looking for. But this is apparently the window that they have. The men, after getting back to the shuttle, apparently also had enough time to completely get out of their spacesuits as they then move through the tube and enter the Soviet space station, commenting on what a mess the station is. However, one of the astronauts does state that the cosmonaut had been living up here by himself for the last 8 months and probably stopped caring much about keeping the place clean. They proceed to continue through the space station until they reach a large biogenetics lab, which has multiple different embryos of different animals in synthetic wombs, and they continue to look through the research as they are being observed by a shadowy figure up in the rafters. However, the general comes across a tube that he states is the stuff dreams are made of, or perhaps nightmares, though we don't know exactly what's in this tube. However, at this point, the creature that has been observing them decides to lunge forward as it screams this word in Russian, which I do know what this word translates to. It translates to father. However, I do not speak Russian, and I have no idea how to read their language, so I don't know how this word is pronounced in Russian. If you do, feel free to leave it in the comments. I would love to know. The creature wastes no time in ripping one of the astronauts' hearts clean out of his chest and then lunges for the general. However, he is attacked from behind by one of the other astronauts who has some sort of electroshock weapon that seems to put an end to the terror of this beast. We are then teleported to the present day, where we see a poem written by one black elk, and we then see a herd of wild mustang running through a field and a man riding on a motorcycle. The man then stops to observe the horses, and we see that he is riding an Indian motorcycle, which, sure. Though I will give Mike Grell credit, this is actually a pretty solid rendition of an Indian motorcycle. He did a very good job of trying to replicate the signature front fender, and I'm very certain that he probably did not get authorization to use Indian's corporate logo, but he did it anyway. We then see the man look at a sign as he thinks to himself, God, I hate this place, as he rides off into the Medicine Hat Reservation, which we see here the sign is riddled with bullet holes, stating that potentially life on this reservation isn't something that is terrific for everyone, and he seems to be one of the people that was not fond of it. We are then transported to the headquarters of Circle C Enterprises as we see a news report where the reporter is speaking about the meetings that Congress is having about potentially deciding whether or not civil rights should be guaranteed to patented life forms. We find out that Circle C Enterprises has been creating human-animal hybrids that are essentially GMOs, genetically modified organisms, that they own patents over and claim that they own these living creatures. Not too dissimilar from what we see current day with the likes of certain companies such as Monsanto. They are essentially holding these creatures as property, despite the fact that these creatures have intelligence. We also see that there are different animal rights groups who are protesting against what Circle C is doing. The Catholic Church is convening to discuss whether or not they believe these creatures do in fact have a soul. And we also, for some reason, see that they interviewed members of the KKK, who, of course, are just being bigots about the whole thing. Why wouldn't they be? We then also see that the creature from the space station is being held captive here in a large cell, but it seems to be very unruly and is being treated very poorly as we see one of the guards spraying it with a fire hose. The man here with the red beard is named Patov. He was the Soviet scientist who was in charge of the space station from the Earth, but was unaware of much of the experimentation that was happening on the space station, as he states that the researcher who was in the lead on the station was very much overstepping his bounds and stepping into uncharted territory. He then explains that the word the creature states, and seems to be the only thing he states in Russian, is the Russian word for father. Meanwhile, back on the reservation, we are shown more, I don't know if you want to say it's a poem or if it's just the writings of These Were the Sioux. We then see a woman skinny dipping in a waterfall, and her name is Sadie, as we see the man on the motorcycle come up alongside her. And then we find out that his name is Joshua Brand. He states to her, "I waited for you." She apparently has some issues with Joshua, as she just shouts, "You bastard," and punches him square in the jaw and then dives back into the water. Back at Circle C Enterprises, we see that the man in charge is giving a tour to a few members of Congress and a high-ranking U.S. general as they start to move through the facility. And he begins to show off some of the patented life forms, as they're called. However, they are colloquially known and referred to as the blood. These are human-animal hybrids. We are first introduced to Banner, who is a human mixed with a badger, which makes him very small, but he also has a high level of strength. He's being developed for purposes of mining. Also, it's explained that all of these creatures have more genetically in common with the animal portion of their makeup than they do the human portion. The human portion is more or less just to give them their basic physical layout in terms of being a bipedal creature. But despite being able to speak English and communicate with humans, they are more animal than they are human. We then meet Docket, who is a human crossed with a monkey. He has a prehensile tail and feet. He's being developed for work in outer space, given that he would be more capable of moving around in 0G. We're then introduced to Sigil, who is crossed between a human and a bat. And while she does have some effects of albinism, she's very poor. She has very poor eyesight and very pale skin. However, due to her echolocation, she can move through pitch darkness with no problems. We then see the men go by this, I guess, holding tank that has a human that is seemingly mixed with some sort of an insect. However, they don't really say much about that creature. They're then introduced to this woman who is Signet, and she is mixed with an ermine or a stoat. If you don't know what a stoat is, they're kind of like ferrets, but smaller. She's also very promiscuous and sexually aggressive with the men. I don't know if this is how stoats act in the wild, if they're sort of like rabbits where they breed a bunch. That's my assumption. The congressmen seem to be a little bit distracted by this woman. However, the general wants to know more about the potential military applications of these creatures. Back on the reservation, we see Josh riding through the middle of town as he comes across the home of Tom, who was apparently his childhood friend and also his blood brother. Josh asks if Tom's going to kick the crap out of him again. Tom says he'll leave that to Sadie, and then Josh lets him know that Sadie's already taken care of it, and states that in the last 12 years, she's developed one hell of a right cross. Tom says, you can't blame her. She was a child, and Josh states that he was as well, implying that the two of them were probably lovers at one point. The two men, though, share an embrace as they are happy to see one another. Tom tells him welcome home, but Josh tells him that this place was never home to him, and that there was only one thing that could ever bring him back. As he starts to make his way towards another house, Tom stops him and says that she's not there. As he then asks where she is, he's looking for his mother, by the way. Tom tells him that she is up with one of the medicine men up in the mountains, and that she's decided to basically go to him for spiritual healing as she is suffering from cancer. Tom states that, she'll be happy to see him, and Josh states that he's going to have to go and find her because he wants to speak with her and take care of her in her final days. He then looks over and sees that the rest of the tribe is preparing for a sun dance, which is a religious ceremony. He asks who the lucky person is that's going to be involved. However, Tom states that he doesn't know. And then Josh states, that used to be illegal for us to do this. However, Tom tells him that it's now been reinstated as an act of religious freedom, as we don't know why it was illegalized. And Josh then hops back onto his motorcycle and states that he's going to see his mother and that he'll be back later. We then see Josh climbing up the side of the mountain as he starts to follow the tracks to the place that his mother is staying, as we hear a voice call out to him stating that he does, in fact, remember the things that he was taught as a child, as he looks up to see a familiar face in the medicine man that is taking care of his mother. He states that, it's not something that you forget, but the old man says that, he's surprised he remembers it's been 12 years, but Josh tells him that it's been 12 years that he's been out living in the real world. The man then kind of scolds Josh a little, but, tells him that he is happy to see him as Josh offers him a cigarette. He then asks where his mother is, and the man directs him to the hut in the side of the mountain underneath a tree. As Josh enters the hut, he sees his mother, who we now find out is actually white, and is distraught by how sickly she appears. She, however, is very happy to see her son. He says that she should be in a hospital, but she tells him that she was, and that there's nothing that they can do for her now other than just pump her full of drugs and deny her any kind of dignity in her own death. Josh then asks what the medicine man can do for her, and she states that he's going to help prepare her soul for the next life. She then states that she hopes Josh understands why she stayed on the reservation even after his father died. And Josh states that he understands very well, as because after being in the outside world, he knows that his father, who was of mixed race as well, half Sioux as it would appear, was probably facing a lot of prejudice in the outside world. But Josh also explains that he felt much of that same prejudice living on the reservation, being that, in the outside world, he was too much of a Lakota, but here on the tribe, but here on the reservation, he was too much of a white. And it's bringing up an interesting dynamic and illustrating the struggle that people of mixed race often feel or are often up against when dealing with, trying to figure out what groups they fit with and find acceptance from, both people groups that they are mixed or of mixed race with. It's unfortunate that they have to go through that. And I feel like it's a really forward-thinking, a progressive idea to highlight something like that in a comic book that was being published in 1993. However, Joshua's mother then tells him that despite the fact that she is white, she was able to find acceptance here amongst the tribe, and that despite the fact that maybe not everyone who's here was fully accepting of her, she felt like this was where she belonged, and that Joshua's problem is that he's too hung up on the differences. However, he states it's because those differences were always shoved down his throat, like from his grandparents, and that when he left the reservation, he went to go meet them and found out why they were never introduced to him before, and states that it was because his mother was ashamed. And she states that she was ashamed, but not of him, her own parents, as she didn't want to expose him to the racism and bigotry that they displayed not only toward his father, but to him, and that she was trying to protect him. She then starts to feel pain from her illness, her cancer, and he begins to worry that his mother is not long for this world. She then yells to him that he has to go on a vision quest and that she wants him to promise her. He finally states that he does promise that he will go on said vision quest, and then tells her that he's going to go get her some water. However, when he exits the hut, or I guess cave, he sees a spear in the ground, and the medicine man is now joined by some of the other tribal leaders, and they state that he is the chosen. However, he tells them to choose someone else. Unfortunately, his mother has overheard this and run out of the cave and states and yells at him that he is the chosen and he must go on this quest that he promised. She then collapses and dies, and Joshua states that he will in fact live up to the promise that he made his mother, as that was her dying wish. We are then shown another writing by Crowfoot on the next page, and we see that Joshua's mother's body has been prepared for her funeral, and he is now dressed in a loincloth with a wreath around his head, as he is then, as we see the medicine man in the background saying, "Oh great Waka Tonka," or Wakan Tonka, excuse me, to please make him worthy. We're then teleported once again back to Circle C, as the men who were in there before, or who were being given the tour before, the congressman and the general, are now being shown the, I guess, soldier unit of what they call the Blood. His name is Blazon. He is a man who, well, he is a mix between a human and a wolf, as he is outfitted with, I guess, this weird dagger armor and these bronze or golden wolf skull pauldrons. It's fine. It's comic books. It's fine. They then release a bull, which he then fights off with his bare hands and manages to kill. The men seem very impressed by this, but are worried that it's possible for him and the other creatures that they've seen to turn on the humans and not serve them. However, they are reassured by the man in charge that all of them are not capable of this, mostly because their maturity rate and lifespan is dictated by the animal that they are crossed with, not their human side. So this man, being a wolf or mixed with a wolf, has matured at the rate of a wolf, meaning he's only about a year and a half old, and is also, this is a fact that is consistent with all of the creatures we've been introduced to so far. They're all under 2 years old. This creature, however, Blazon, he will only live about 10 to 13 years in total. And because of this, it's stated that by the time that they would want to turn on their human masters per se, they would already be reaching the end of their lives and they would be incapable of carrying out any said plans. Meanwhile, back to the reservation, we see that Tom is upset that Josh is the one who has been chosen for the ceremony and wonders why it can't be him. However, his father states that it's because that Tom has, always kind of, I guess, wanted that too much or felt like it was owed to him, and that is not the case in such matters, that the chosen is indeed chosen by Wakantanka, the sun spirit, and that you can't make yourself be the chosen one. It's decided for you. As the ceremony begins, we see that Josh is standing at the foot of a large pole that's been erected in the middle of town. And he states that, well, he's never felt like he was accepted or that he was treated poorly by many of the members of the tribe while living on the reservation, that now it seems that, the time has come to decide whether or not he is truly worthy and good enough to be regarded as a member of the tribe, and that they're going to find out the truth. Meanwhile, back at Circle C, we see that Blazon is being led by the cage that is holding the creature that we saw on the space station. The creature then yells out, "Dog, you are nothing but a slave." However, Blazon takes major offense to this as he lunges towards the door of the cage and says, "I'm not the one in the cage, pussycat." The guards, however, are quite horrified by this as they can't seem to split the two of them up, and they're afraid that they're going to kill each other. So they decide to use the collar that Blazon is wearing to shock him, which brings him to his knees. And then we see the creature from the cage say, "Are you not imprisoned as well?" as we see Blazon in pain as he's being helped to his feet by the guards. Then back at the ceremony, we see that the medicine man asks if Josh is ready. Josh says, "If I'm not ready now, I never will be. Let's get on with this." As we see him insert 2 spikes through the skin of Josh's chest, he begins to sweat profusely with dealing with the pain of this. He then attaches 2 wires to the spikes going through Josh's chest, and they begin to lift him off the ground by these wires. And that is really tough, man. That's gotta be a rough way to be initiated into anything. As Josh is lifted into the air by the wires, he is then visited by the Earth Spirit woman, who states that he is indeed the chosen and that he is worthy of the gift he is about to receive, as he is now named the Wakasa Wakan, and that he is given the stalking, or that he is the stalking wolf and given the abilities of such. This is actually a really cool 2-page spread. I like how you get the background image of outer space, but we also see the head of a crow and a depiction of the Earth Spirit woman. And we see Josh's face mixed with that of a wolf. It's a really good image overall, and I just really like what's being portrayed in, trying to take that of the physical world and blend it with that of the spiritual world. And on the final page of the story, we see Josh now being portrayed in his costume that we saw on the first page, and that he is being endowed with the abilities of the different animal spirits of the bison, the wolf, the bear, not necessarily a crow or raven, but the birds of the air and that of the cougar. And that the next issue is the blood. The next page is more continuation of the letter that we saw at the beginning of the book, and it continues on to the next page after this. We then see the conclusion of the letter by Mike Gold. As I stated before, this is really just a rundown of the history between Mike Gold and Mike Grell. And then on the next page, we get an advertisement for Shaman'e Tears #2 and how it's going to have the world's largest cover twice, and discover how that's done, and also stating that it's kicking tail this month and every month from Image Comics. However, this statement would not hold true for very long, as we will find out momentarily. We then see an advertisement for Cyberforce #0. If you'd like to know more about Cyberforce, feel free to check out my Cyberforce playlist. And then an advertisement for Union. If you'd like to know more about Union, feel free to check out my Union playlist. We then see an advertisement for the Savage Dragon. If you'd like to know more about the Savage Dragon, you can check out my Savage Dragon playlist. Also, it brings up an advertisement for the beginning of Freak Force. I have not made any videos about Freak Force yet because we have not reached the point in the story where Freak Force becomes its own entity, but that will be happening in the future, as I do have every single issue of Freak Force, and I will be making videos about it because Freak Force is awesome. We then see an ad for Dooms 4. I don't have any issues of Dooms 4, surprisingly. I don't know how I've never come across any of these. I will keep an eye out for them. I can't imagine it's going to be impossible for me to find any of this stuff, but I hope to find them in the future and do some videos about this title as well. We then see an advertisement for Crush Velvet, where you can apparently get any woman you want. I don't recall what Crush Velvet is, and I don't know that I've ever seen it. It's apparently from Tribe 5, and it says to read it and believe it. I don't know what any of this is, but I hope to come across it at some point, because I would like to know. This is actually kind of mysterious. We're then treated to a black and white image of Josh in his, I guess, superhero costume, for lack of a better term. And in front of him, we see silhouettes of several of the different blood members that we saw in this issue. Overall, it's a pretty cool image, but it's very odd that it's placed here, and you will see why in just a moment. On the next page, we get an advertisement for the infamous Spawn #11 that was written by Frank Miller. If you'd like to know more about Spawn, and Spawn #11 in particular, you can check out my Spawn playlist. Personally, I find Spawn #11 to be very easily the most poorly written of the first 15 issues of Spawn, and it really felt like Frank Miller super phoned that in, man. If you want to watch my video on #11, I think you will agree. It seems like very much a Freak of the Week type of issue that could have just as easily not existed and no one would have cared. And on the reverse inside cover, we see the exact same image that we just saw of Josh standing in front of the silhouette members of the Blood. I don't understand why you would print this on one of the interior pages to only then again print it on the reverse inside cover. Literally just like a page later. It doesn't make any sense. And that was Shaman'e Tears #1. Overall, I thought it was a pretty cool book. It's very unique. But this is where we get into the part where we have to talk about why I'm doing this video. If you've been following my videos on the Spawn series, you will recall that there are multiple letter sections in Spawn where people write in complaining about the fact that the Shaman'e Tears book was canceled by Image. More notably, Mike Grell was essentially voted out of Image by 4 of the 6 founding members. Now, I can't find any type of reference that lists the members who voted him out. However, Todd does insinuate pretty heavy-handedly that he was not one of the people who wanted Mike gone. And it's never stated why they wanted him gone. It is brought up that, they wanted to keep Image more superhero oriented. But, in my opinion, the character of Josh kind of fits that role. And, he is fighting these genetically engineered, human animal hybrids. And, there's also, it was brought up that he wasn't meeting his deadlines, but who cares? Nobody in the first 2 years of Image was meeting their deadlines. I mean, hell, there were times where some of those artists were going 6 months in between issues. And I really feel like something underhanded was going on at the time with the founders at Image, because, one of the reasons so many people were upset about Mike Grell's ousting was due to the fact that, Mike Grell wasn't some newcomer to the industry. He was a 20-year veteran at the point that he was joining Image and starting Shaman'e Tears. And, he had worked for DC for a long time during that period. He had worked on Superboy and, Legion of Superheroes. He created the Warlord. He also basically reinvented Green Arrow, taking over with he didn't take over the main series right away. He started with Longbow Hunters miniseries and then took over the main series. But he was the first person to ever, make a redesign change to Green Arrow's costume. And then also, and this is something that I feel is pretty important. During his run on Green Arrow, at no point was the word Green Arrow, or were the words Green Arrow ever written on the interior of the stories. The only place that the words Green Arrow appeared were on the cover. Mike actually took the time to try and ground the Green Arrow character more so in reality, and almost made him more akin to the Punisher in a lot of ways. Not that he was necessarily like just murdering villains, but making him like an edgier, more, violent, more realistic character who was dealing with more realistic emotions, and just making the story of Green Arrow darker than it had ever been. And, really just taking that character in a completely new direction from where it had been prior to his work on the series. And for the guys at Image to state that someone like him wasn't welcome in their company really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I can understand that. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary. You may have felt that Mike Grell didn't belong there. Maybe you didn't like Shaman'e Tears. And if you didn't, that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.